Good afternoon. My name is Brian Mitchell and I'm the president of Open Source Matters. I'm honored to be providing the closing presentation for this amazing event, JDay or JoomlaDay USA. Thank you all for coming, and thank you especially for the team that put this event together. With all due respect to the French speakers among us, liberté, égalité, fraternité. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Actually, it was the summer after my sophomore year of high school. I happened to be cast in the role of Charles Darnay in A Tale of Two Cities that took place at the Grand Opera House in downtown Oshkosh, Wisconsin. I can tell you on good authority that the Grand Opera House's website is built with Joomla. I was very excited to be performing on the stage at the Grand. I had been following in the footsteps of such performers as Groucho Marx, the great escape artist from Appleton, Wisconsin, Harry Houdini, John Philip Sousa, Vincent Price, most recently Jeff Daniels, who is a big fan of the Grand Opera House. I encourage you to think more storytelling and folk music rather than Dumb and Dumber. And then of course, back again in my high school years myself on that stage. The reason I start off with that profound statement from the French Revolution is that is how the rehearsal process for A Tale of Two Cities began. I didn't even know what those words meant. I certainly couldn't produce them then, much less now. But I remember the rehearsal process for A Tale of Two Cities started with that proclamation. A bunch of high school kids running around the rehearsal space, shaking our fists in the air, chanting, Liberté, égalité, fraternité. Little did I know that all these decades later, just a few decades later, I would be part of an organization that saw these three words, or their synonyms, as central to our core values. Of course, we can talk about liberty being equivalent to freedom, which is the basis of my presentation this afternoon. Equality is the easiest one, that's a direct translation. And then fraternité is a little trickier. We could translate it into fraternity or brotherhood in English. I like to be more inclusive and think about it in the context of community. So freedom, equality, community. Liberté, égalité, fraternité. It's kind of a fun connection between those two. I want to talk about one other concept before I go further though, and that's one of integrity. Integrity is something that's really important and central to me and my business. And we talk about it not just meaning telling the truth. We think about integrity as aligning our thoughts, our words, and our actions. And I want to make sure as I move forward today that I honor that sense of integrity to the absolute best of my ability. And the reason I point that out is that I have two problems. First of all, I'm a community member with my own ideas and thoughts and opinions about how the world should work and how Joomla should operate. But in addition, I'm also very aware of the fact that I'm in the position or the role of the president of Open Source Matters. And oftentimes, especially the outside world, will look to the role of the president as speaking on behalf of the community. So I try and do that with a great deal of respect, but also acknowledging I have my own thoughts as well. So how to live that tension effectively. I'd love to share my thoughts and opinions with you, and I've been blessed with the opportunity to do that at various points throughout the event this weekend. But I want to make sure that I'm also speaking with the integrity of the voice of the president, the role that I happen to hold within the community. So that's tension point number one. Tension point number two is actually a motion that the board put forward in November of 2020, and I was on the board at that time. And the motion was put forward to address a particular problem. It's actually motion number 2020/136. And it says this exactly. Joomla is a non-political organization and inclusive of everybody. In that context, any public-facing Joomla-oriented communication should be void of political or otherwise offensive comments or references. I chuckle a little bit because the presumption in that statement is that political speech is inherently offensive. So again, that statement was, the motion was, Joomla is a non-political organization and inclusive of everybody. In that context, any public-facing, Joomla-oriented communication should be void of political or otherwise offensive comments or references. This is certainly a Joomla-oriented communication that's public-facing. So I need to deal with the nature of my presentation on freedom as being void of political or otherwise offensive comments or references. I was pleased to see that Merriam-Webster provides 4 definitions of the word political. 3 out of those 4 definitions mention government specifically, and the one that does not mention government talks specifically about partisanship or partisan politics. And so I want to just take a little bit of time and acknowledge that we have a governing body of Joomla, Open Source Matters, a governing body that isn't supposed to be making political statements or statements about government. You can imagine that we weren't, as a board of directors, super excited about the brand name Joomla being affiliated with political speech in the context of American partisan political dialogue. So that was the spirit in which that motion was passed. And I even struggle with the letter of it. I'm not sure how I would effectively correct the language that would still accommodate that situation. And I think it was a good impulse to try and keep us out of partisan politics. But at the same time, the very nature of our core values is political. The very nature of our license, our open source general public license, is political. The very act of creating open source software is political. So how to square that circle, how to live with integrity in the tension of not wanting to get involved in American partisan politics, or any other country's partisan politics for that matter, while at the same time retaining a sense of who we are and what it is that we represent in our core values. And so for the purposes of the rest of my comments this afternoon, and I think probably for understanding this motion in context moving forward, I would like to talk about freedom in the context of political philosophy, and I would also like to talk about it in that context of philosophy rather than political partisanship. So we're making a distinction of freedom as a philosophical idea, as a concept that can be applied in the real world, separate from partisan politics. So hopefully that distinction is clear, and that's the spirit in which I'm going to be understanding that motion for the rest of this presentation. The problem with our current cultural milieu is that everything is increasingly political, and I don't mean in the philosophical sense. Everything in our culture right now is increasingly political in the partisan sense. We all feel that tension. It's interesting, even in preparing for JoomlaDay USA, I was curious to see how the marketing would be handled, and I did not talk to the team about any of this ahead of time. But one of the challenges we have in our world in a partisan context is the tension between nationalism and globalism. And I think most of us can sort of feel which way the political winds blow on each one of those positions. And something as basic as the American flag, stars and stripes, have pretty nationalist overtones and start to lean towards partisanship. And so I was curious to see how much the marketing materials, the branding for everything as simple as JoomlaDay USA would tie into some of those ideas. I did have fun as I got my swag bag. I did find the only thing that spoke of American nationalism was a single sticker in the swag bag, and it's pretty low key. I don't say that as a critique, it was just a point of interest for me in feeling how effectively the team managed the nuance of our current political landscape and wanting to proudly promote our country and what we stand for and how that aligns with all things Joomla. So we can talk about that tension between globalism and nationalism as political constructs. Fear not. I'm going to argue later in the presentation that there's actually a third way that is profoundly American and is politically nonpartisan as it relates to freedom. So I think there's a way that we can thread the needle on globalism versus nationalism. We can also talk about corporatism versus government. Where do we turn for solutions? Free enterprise and business, or is government providing our solutions? Again, at least in the American political landscape, we can feel the tension between those two positions. I'm going to argue that, again, we have a third way that is profoundly American, and it is politically nonpartisan, especially as it relates to freedom. And for that third way, I'm going to turn to the insights of Alexis de Tocqueville. And I know the French community is getting a huge nod in this presentation. I don't know what it is about American culture and French culture and the shared affinity that we have for freedom. And not that that isn't shared worldwide, but I just think it's something core to the identity of our two histories and our two backgrounds. But Frenchman Alexis de Tocqueville visited the United States in the early years of its founding, and he made a couple of observations. He's often quoted as it relates to life and society in early America. I'm going to share two of his quotes with you. The first is he observed, and I quote, In the United States, as soon as several inhabitants have taken an opinion or an idea that they wish to promote in society, they seek each other out and unite together once they have made contact. From that moment, they are no longer isolated, but have become a power seen from afar, whose activities serve as an example and whose words are heeded. So of course he's talking about the voluntary spirit of the American people as he experienced it early in our history. And so he's seeing that and is astounded by it and encouraged by it. He continues in an additional quote, "It is simple to see the time approaching when man will decreasingly be able to produce alone the commonest necessities of life. The tasks of government will increase, therefore constantly increase, and its very exertions must daily extend its scope. The only way opinions and ideas can be renewed, hearts enlarged, and human minds developed is through the reciprocal influence of one person upon another. These influences are practically non-existent in democratic countries. Thus, they have created artificially that which associations alone can achieve." Again, speaking of the power of people coming together voluntarily to share common purpose, to share common goals. And of course, that's not unique anymore to the American experience or the French experience. It's the global experience that we share as a community in Joomla. And so that's my third way. That's the way that threads the gap. It's neither nationalist or globalist, neither corporatist or state-driven. It's voluntary. It's coming together to share a sense of values and to share a sense of purpose. So what does this have to do with Joomla? I have a hunch that as a community we'll be increasingly called into situations that are politically partisan. The challenge is we have a diverse global community that values respect, community, and freedom. We need to understand that different members of the community will contextualize these ideas, these values, differently as they approach global events or even local events. Part of valuing equality, which is another one of our core values, is to value the diversity of ideas. Different people will think differently about the same situations. To speak on behalf of the entire global community about social or political issues outside the scope of our mission to develop open source software, I would argue, is actually counter to our values. It presumes that we speak with univocity in a way that may or may not be present. We don't speak with one voice on all issues. We do speak with one voice on our shared values. In short, within the context of the Joomla community, our members may have freedom of thought and incredible freedom of expression. We encourage them to speak freely as individuals about our own feelings on particular issues. However, as a community, we speak about our stated vision and mission and how specifically they reflect our shared values. We share values and we come together voluntarily to achieve our ends. It's outside the corporatist statist divide, it's outside the nationalist globalist divide. We often talk about freedom as a series of rights. Rights have to be enforced. What if instead we offer freedom as a gift? Not as something to be taken or even defended, but rather as something to be given. A gift that promotes community over partisanship. It is political, but it's political in the philosophical rather than in the partisan sense. We come together voluntarily without coercion to create better software and maybe even a better world. We create software that empowers others, software that literally gives freedom to others. Everything I've said so far is about the social context within which we develop Joomla. What about the code? That part's actually much easier. Joomla is more than about pressing words into service on behalf of freedom. It is about empowering people with functionality, with tools, empowering communities to achieve their own ends. That empowerment is freedom by definition. Of course, we can't talk about software and freedom and open source without acknowledging the 4 freedoms that we promise in our open source license. Those 4 freedoms include the freedom to run the program as you wish for any purpose. That's the first freedom, or freedom 0. The freedom to study how the program works and to change it so it does your computing as you wish. This requires access to the source code. It's what necessitates that the source code be open. And part of what we've been doing is not just making that code available, but providing people that are willing to teach and to share their wisdom and their insight into how to make the code better so it achieves your ends more effectively. The third freedom is the freedom to redistribute copies so that you can help others. And of course, our software is freely available in that way. And then finally, the freedom to distribute copies of the modified versions to others. You make changes, and you can do this by but you give the whole community a chance to benefit from your changes, not just from the original source code. And again, access to source code is a precondition of this. So we provide those four freedoms. It's the freedom to run the program as you wish, the freedom to study the program, the freedom to redistribute the copies of the original, and the freedom to redistribute copies of your changes. So that's the licensing, but what about the code? What about Joomla is unique in the way that it empowers people and provides freedom? Well, of course, Joomla for many years now has provided a multilingual experience right out of the box that is second to none. It's provided, as of yesterday's trivia quiz, in 67 different languages. Joomla is industry leading in authentication and security features. Joomla provides a robust MVC structure that allows developers to craft different, well-integrated solutions. This creates value for the developers, for website builders, and their clients. It's literally the freedom to prosper. Joomla is also taking the lead on asserting the importance of accessibility across the platform. This is not just for individuals that have issues accessing websites, but it benefits everybody. You've also been hearing about all the things that Joomla can do all day. You've been hearing about all the things Joomla 4 can already do in beta and will do as we approach the release candidate and ultimately the Joomla 4 stable releases. You've been surrounded by the voluntary spirit of people teaching, coding, brainstorming, encouraging, leading, and yes, giving. Joomla is a gift of freedom that we give to each other. Joomla is a gift of freedom that we give to the world. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much, all of you, for giving the gift of your time to take part in this incredible event and in this community. Thank you to the amazing team that put JoomlaDay USA together, and on behalf of the Joomla Project and the Board of Directors for Open Source Matters, until we meet again, I wish you liberté, égalité, fraternité. Thank you all together. Joomla.